Welcome everyone. And Elle's going to be talking about, she has a new book out, The Elysian Volume 3.
Um,
And she's the founder of The Elysian on Substack, which is both a publication but also an online community. I'm a member of it. I don't know how many do we have? How many do you have in the group? A couple dozen, maybe?
I don't know. The Slack is filled has 250 people in it, but I think most are lurkers.
Okay, yeah.
There's only a few of us that are active all the time.
Um, and I first discovered your writing, I guess probably early 2025. And I was always struck by how you had, in spite of kind of the political um, chaos around us, you always seem to have an optimistic vision. And we're just sort of thinking seriously about what should the future look like. And I've always been sort of an idealistic optimist myself, and so that really resonated with me. But before we get into the book itself, why don't you uh, tell us a little bit about sort of your upbringing, your background, and what sort of brought you to this point? Because you sort of opened the book by talking about how you went on a sabbatical and came back and was just kind of freaked out. So what led you up to that point?
Oh, well, yeah, so I put out basically the Elysian volumes are 1 year of my work printed every year for my subscribers. And so this was the third year that I did that. And so this particular year, I was traveling. My husband and I traveled for 18 months because he had a non-compete in his industry, which meant if he wanted to change jobs, he had to quit his job and not work for 18 months. And since my job is a writer, I'm remote, so we just kind of took off and traveled. And so this volume was that. Kind of what led me to this point. I've been a writer as long as I can remember. I think in college I there was like a book, the 10,000 Hours book, whatever that one
Oh,
was.
Malcolm Gladwell, yeah.
Yeah, the Malcolm Gladwell book. And I was like, well, okay, what one thing am I going to devote my life to that I will get 10,000 hours out of eventually? And that was just writing for me because I like to fully immerse myself in research in a full world and like use my imagination and then come out the other end with something that I feel like I know a lot about because I researched it to the end of the world and then invented a new world in the making and came out with this thing and then can move on to the next thing I want to learn, full immersion. And so I was doing that kind of professionally as a journalist for a while, and then started my Substack like 4 years ago and went full time with it about 2 years ago.
Okay. And a lot of what you write about is um, I would say it sort of oscillates between kind of idealism and practicality. Um, and like your book, there's quite a lot to it. I recommend it to everyone. There's like at least 3 dozen essays in this, and you break it into three big categories: governance, capitalism, environment, and then you have a neat little thing at the end about anarchy or anarchism. Um, and has that always been your? I mean, these are both. I mean, capitalism is like a big topic, but it's also lots of little things, right? It's lots of coordination that has to happen. Has that always been of interest to you?
Um, it actually came about because I wanted to write a utopian novel, and so the world building involved in creating a utopian novel, and my novel is set like a couple thousand years into the future. So the idea that every possible thing could change, what is the viewpoint through which I view my work. So that's a very different, I think, prism to be looking at even current events through rather than like
Mhm.
this latest thing happened, everything is crazy. Because it's like, well, in 1,000 years, in 10,000 years, that's not even going to be a thing anymore. What will? Everything will be different. If you like think about the last 2,000 years of history, everything is completely different. None of the countries are even the same or the borders are the same. So with that lens on things, my nonfiction work was basically world building for my novel. What would government look like in the future? And I started reading all these other thinkers who thought that same way. And so a lot of them were utopian novelists. like Thomas More and William Morris and like you think about Karl Marx, he was like this a system, I'm going to invent a whole new system now. Common Sense by Thomas Paine. What if we just didn't have monarchy anymore and we like invented our own country? So I was like very into starting to read all these other thinkers who thought that same way and even wrote novels, kind of imagining that. And so yeah, that's definitely the lens. So sometimes my work comes off almost pure fantasy because you're like, oh, this is speculative. What in 100 years, what could this look like? But at other times, it's like, well, this could actually happen. And here's how we could make that happen. Um, yeah, it's fun.
Okay. And I forgot to sort of in introduction, you sort of say that, after you came back, you were just kind of, when did you come back to the US after your 18 month? Was that last year or 2024?
I got back in June last year.
Okay. And so a lot had changed. And so first of all, just tell us about that. I mean, you kind of went through some despair, it sounds like, and just tell us about that
Well, I
experience.
just didn't know how to write because it just seemed like the United States changed so much. And even though we were traveling internationally, like the first, usually the first thing people ask you is, "Oh, where are you from?" And then you say United States, and then they say, "Oh, Donald Trump, Elon Musk," was like literally the first thing everybody said to us everywhere we were, whether we were in like Malaysia or Thailand or Japan or New Zealand or anywhere. So it just kind of felt like this constant thing that we had to like grapple with and talk about with people. And that was like frustrating for me as a writer because I was like almost living in this fantasy land of travel and exploration. And I'm like writing till noon and then I'm like going off to see elephants. And then the next day I'm like in a new place and we're taking a sleeper train somewhere and I've never done that before. And so it was like this kind of fantastical personal life, but like this kind of weird political life that everybody wanted to talk about all the time. Um,
Mm,
and and I struggled with that in my writing because I was like, how much do I need to address the current moment? Like, do I need to? Like, is it ridiculous for me to still focus on a 1,000 year future from now, when people are so upset about what's happening right now? And I read a lot of other thinkers on this because, like, for example, um, oh, now I'm gonna blank on his name. There was like a very prominent philosopher who like basically just kept writing idealism until World War II got so bad that he was like, okay, finally, I'm just gonna talk about this. And he was almost like too late at talking about it. And I was just like, I don't know what to do here. Am I supposed to be the idealist still, or the visionary, trying to think of a better future? Am I like how do we unite these two quarreling groups of people? Am I like, how I need to fight against my enemies? And I didn't know how to address that as a writer. And so the message you're talking about was when I like turned to Victor Hugo's Les Châtiments, which were
mhm.
like his political screeds that he wrote when Napoleon, I think it was the third, was just kind of going gangbusters on the world. And he kind of wrote this book of poetry that was very anti-Napoleon, but it all rhymed. So you're like, this, he's like so mad, but it's like coming off really beautiful. And I was kind of reminded that like, I love that he still made art of this. But I also like Les Miserables way better. So I think that it's still worthwhile to produce art when things are crazy. And in fact, those are like big inflection points when you can really steer things in different directions and when visionary thoughts and idealism can really come into play. And in fact, like you think about Thomas Paine, he would never have even said the US should be its own country if they weren't having such trouble with Britain. So
Mm.
any kind of period of inflection is a period when we can really push utopian thought through from visionary to action, I guess.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, that's a good, you mentioned sort of the fighting sides. And so I'll actually drill into one of the essays, which was, I think, titled, Am I a Republican or a Democrat?
Yeah.
And so why don't you sort of unpack that a little bit for us?
Um, Yeah, I think the binary thinking just pushes people through to one side, and if you actually think through independent issues, like nobody is actually totally stacked up in one party or another, like just one full group. And so that article was just kind of me thinking through the things that I believe. For example, I do think that that the US states should have tax autonomy just like EU countries do. And that like state separatism thing is a more of a Republican trait in the United States for some reason. But I'm also very for social programs. And if I lived in the independent state of Utah and it had universal health care, I'd be all for that, which is like a Democratic view for some reason. And so that post was just kind of thinking through like my laundry list of beliefs and how they don't like follow a particular thing. So why do we keep trying to force these weird binaries when they don't make sense?
Yeah, I would bet that a lot of people here can somewhat relate to that.
Oh
Like,
yeah, just nodding
like
head.
I've always said, I've always felt like most of the time, like no party, whether it's Republican or Democrat or like one of the European, there's more kind of variety there. I feel like most of the time it's not so much what do I like about my party and more about what can I absolutely not tolerate from the other party. And because there's plenty. I mean, full disclosure, I've voted Democrat pretty much exclusively for over 30 years now. But that doesn't mean I've loved even most of what the Democrats do. It's more to like just there's a few things that I think are pretty important, and there's
Right.
other things that I think are just awful that I can never vote for, and that's sort of how it shakes out for me. So, um,
Yeah, I agree.
but let's talk. You mentioned kind of the states' rights thing, and so tell us more about the sort of the federalism argument. You said states should have autonomy. What do they not have now that you would like to see? Or what is the federal government doing badly that you think would be better done at the states?
Um, well, okay. I think that I think that the federal government should be as small as humanly possible. I think that we should be I think that life should be controlled at our closest possible touch point. So cities should be the most powerful, then states, then federal government. And there's very easy ways that that could work out. For example, in the Basque Country in Spain, it's an autonomous region in Spain, and it has the power to tax the Basque Country, and that is the only tax that people living in the Basque Country have. So if you work at a company in the Basque Country, the Basque Country is taxing you, not Spain, not the EU, like your localist entity. And the Basque region then keeps 90% of that tax revenue and recycles it back into the community through, building buildings and public parks and all the things that are closest to our lives, right where we live. That's where the money is being invested. And then they have this remittance to Spain called a cupo, which is just like 6% of their GDP goes to Spain, and Spain gives them like social services like healthcare. Everybody in the Basque Country gets services from Spain from that remittance. And then Spain in turn um, remits 1% of their GDP to the EU, which funds larger things like, continental trade and managing the euro currency and border control and things like that. And that to me is the ideal structure. I think that it is completely backward. Like the United States is doing it completely backwards, where the federal government gets 60% of our tax revenue. The states get like 20%, and cities are left with this kind of like 5%, 5 to 8%. And then cities are kind of hamstrung because they have to like, oh, we need a transit system. Hey, state, will you let me build a transit system? And then the state or federal government has to like give them grants and be like, okay, you can build a transit system, but it comes with all these strings attached because you're getting it from the federal government and the state. And That is just that's so backward to me. Like let the states have the most autonomy. And when I say autonomy, it's fiscal autonomy, it's tax autonomy because cities and states already have autonomy in governance. Like states already have legislatures, they already have governors, they already have the setup. They literally just don't have the money to spend on their communities. So that's how I
Mm,
would do it if I took over the United States.
right. Go for president.
No.
What about so another kind of common theme in your writing is like along the same lines as like worker autonomy, you know. And so one of your essays is about, you know, 120 million employee owners. Um, Tell us more about like where that idea comes from and how you kind of imagine that playing out.
I've actually revised my thinking on that article because at the time that I wrote it, I had visited Mondragon in Spain and I had written this monster article about how Mondragon is one of the largest cooperatives in the entire world and it's basically created a city state. Like the company of Mondragon could literally exist without any government over it. It provides everything its workers needs. And I was like, we should have Mondragons all over the world. And the United States is particularly hostile to this idea, and cooperatives are like nearly impossible in the United States. Like, you basically, once you have more than 30 employees, a cooperative becomes really hard to manage just because of various regulatory structures of and business structures in the United States. So, what we've created instead is this like employee ownership stock program called an ESOP. And those are cool, and there are a lot of them in the United States, but like the basically what they do is make all the employees equity owners of the company, which is great, but the equity comes in the form of like a 401k. It's a retirement plan. And I feel that that really doesn't help wealth inequality whatsoever because equity owners of companies are the richest people in our country, but they can just sell their stock immediately and then use it to do whatever they want. Like,
Mhm.
you know, get influence in politics or, you know, buy another company or buy more stocks. Whereas an ESOP employees are kind of like, well, I can't do anything with it until I retire.
Oh,
Um,
I didn't know that.
yeah, so it's like this kind of, it's like I agree with the I think all companies should be employee owned, but I think we need better employee ownership structures. And so I'm actually more interested now in employee ownership trusts. And why I'm really into this idea is because a trust can be anything, not just your workers. So, for example, I live in the state of Utah. Right now, if a company exits, they can either be purchased by another company, or they can go public, or they can sell to their employees. And if they but there's like another option. They can create a trust. And Patagonia did this for the environment. They like created a trust that or it was like a nonprofit that owns that like works in the best interest of natural resources. And so the idea was that company holds the stock of Patagonia, this like retailer. But it can be for anything. So a company where I live in Utah could, for example, exit to 50% or exit 50% of its equity to its employees who then hold that stock. And it could also exit 50% of the company to this everybody who lives in Utah. So if you start like running the numbers on that, it's kind of interesting because like if all the corporate equity that was made in Utah went to Utahns, we'd like get like $8,000 a month or something, and it, as like a universal basic income. So there's so many unique things we can do with corporate equity. One of my favorites is the city of Bournville, which was purchased by the Cadbury chocolatiers. They exited the entire city to a trust. To this day, 100 years later, the city is owned and run by the people that live there, which I think is so cool. So there's so many things that we can do to make corporate equity not like owned by investors, but various stakeholders, depending on what the company is.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and actually maybe Marcus, I'll um, when we break for questions, I'll ask you about the network because that's kind of the network state philosophy on some level, right? Is like ownership and right to exit and contributions and it's kind of a libertarian sort of utopian
This
vision.
is my problem with the network state because so far every network state is actually a bunch of investors, like
Right.
or a corporation that is running in the best interest of the corporation. It's not running in the best interest of residents. Like even if you think about the closest things to an actual network state, like Prospera, it's not like benefiting the residents. It's benefiting the property owners, the private property owners of the resort.
Well, I think I think the problem, this all kind of emerges from crypto, right? So crypto is a fairly utopian idea. I think the problem with crypto is it got too liquid too fast. If you look at Jonathan Lass at the Bulwark wrote a really good piece about this last year. If you look at sort of the industrialists of the past, the sort of the Gilded Age era, building Bethlehem Steel. I mean, that was a very long-term, very hard problem that involved managing thousands of people. And, it compounded over time, over 30 years. But Andrew Carnegie, he wasn't very liquid at that time. I mean, yes, they had cash flow and profits, but he couldn't just like cash out. And and so over the course of 30 years, he gets to understand how people work and how you manage them and how, when you expand, it's not just like launching a web page, right? It's like literally you have to put people in the city where you're trying to sell the steel to. And so it's just you're much more in contact with humans on a day-to-day basis. And digital technologies have allowed companies to go from 0 to 1 billion in 12 months and have people all over the world using their technologies. And so there's like this distance between you and people. And I think that's kind of warped our politics to some degree. And I think that's kind of the network state vision too. It's like, um, Biology's, I think, a very interesting thinker, but he's an interesting thinker whose entire, everyone who surrounds him is people who went to Stanford and MIT and Harvard. They're all very smart, very driven people, but they're not like I used to manage an apartment complex in Branson, Missouri. It's a very different cohort of people there. So that's my little rant about that. Um, One of
Yeah.
your other essays is titled "Social Development is greater than self-development," and
Oh,
I
yeah.
like this idea, like being pro-social as opposed to just kind of like alpha male hit the gym. So, I mean, tell us more about that.
Yeah, that was me being very frustrated with the Stoicism movement. I have some other posts I have not read or published that are more focused on that. But I was just getting really annoyed because for some reason popular culture has started to worship like Stoic philosophy, which was kind of like which was a very influential philosophy, and it was very much like we should develop ourselves to be like more resilient against the forces in our lives, and like that's really good. But those people were also like going through slavery and stuff, and just trying to like not be emotionally tumultuous, and like having heads chopped off right next to them in battle, Marcus Aurelius style, and I think that kind of bode well for that time period. But for people now, for it to be taken up by business leaders, and you see entrepreneurs all over the place, like quoting Stoic philosophy and this idea of like, I should develop myself and like focus my energy on like becoming a better person and like becoming more like empathetic and how can I like think about what to do with myself. And I was just like, that's all bullshit. If you're you can help yourself all you want. You won't be a better person unless you help somebody else. And so my intention with that article is to say like we need to stop focusing on the self. We need to focus on the social. Social development is better than self-development. And in almost any case, like even if you're like I'm terribly depressed, the answer isn't for you to like sit there and be like how do I heal from depression? Like I have to do all these like therapy. It's like go volunteer somewhere and help somebody else, and then you stop being depressed. And like that, that's how I got out of depression when I was in depression in my early 20s. Like I think so. For whatever reason, we've focused on the self at the expense of the social, and if we just focus literally on being more helpful people, that's what the world needs. Not a bunch of enlightened people.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of our sort of social media dysfunction is people, instead of helping other people, they were just telling other people. Sometimes it was canceling, sometimes it was just lecturing and hectoring, and uh, what you're really doing was helping your views, right? Helping your the number of likes you got and things like that, but it wasn't really helping people.
I don't know.
I
All
mean,
I know.
social media is the most antisocial thing. It's just like it's deranging. Um, so another of your essays, let's circle back to capitalism for a minute. Um, you say companies will usurp the nation state, which
Oh,
I think is actually a lot of people fear that, right? That
oh
companies
yeah.
become too powerful. I
That was a
mean,
clickbaity title.
yeah. What's your thinking there?
Yeah, I was making the case that companies are already more powerful than nations in a lot of ways. A lot of them are richer than a lot of nations. A lot of them have a lot of economic power in the world, and a lot of them have a lot of power in politics. Um, And so companies are in a lot of ways more powerful than nation states already. And that's why we need better models of companies, was what I was saying. So, and I again brought it back to Mondragon and like this idea of if we can create better companies, um, then then we can totally change that dynamic. Mondragon was a democratic company in a dictatorship. Spain was under a dictatorship when they started in the 1950s. This company was the only democracy in Spain. And in fact, when Franco the dictator fell in the 19 or died in the 1970s, Spain came to Mondragon and was like, what should we do for democracy? And basically just like copied what a company did, which is so spectacular and amazing. And so in my mind was like, we need to create more of those so that we don't end up with a techno-feudal future instead.
Yeah. Do you think we're at risk of techno-feudalism?
Um, sure. Yeah. I I'm I'm pretty mad at the companies in my country because they have so much potential and they've done I'm just like for example, Google, their whole thing was do no evil. And for a long time I really thought that they were a white hat there because some of the things they were able to do, like whenever they have company headquarters all over the world, and they use those head company headquarters to like provide amazing things for their employees, including public transportation to and from work and free food, all breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and childcare for people. And they really like they some of the countries they were in were became war torn, and they would literally move all their employees from that country into another country where they also had a headquarters. And I was like, okay, this is like a cool future where these companies can kind of just like move around. They're not dependent on a nation state. If a nation becomes a bad one, they can like move to a good one. And they have this, ability. And and I just was so annoyed that all of our companies are just like, well, we're just not gonna stand up and do anything. Like we're gonna waste away our potential. Like Google could be like one of my favorite utopian novels of all time, the Terra Ignota series. The Google could have been like, we're leaving the United States and we're like setting up our offices in this country, and this country. All of our companies, our people are willing to move. Like they have the bargaining power to literally force crazy change. And so it's like a bummer to me that we're not using our companies in that way. It would be really sick if they did.
One thing that still always just like blows my mind about Google is still the vast majority of the revenue comes from people clicking on little links in
I know.
search results. You know, it's like all that money is just from people clicking on links in search results. It's unreal. Um,
And it's a terrible experience.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's what do they call it? Enshittification. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bad product now.
So why don't we pause here? I've been just sort of picking different chapters out and throwing them out for people, but there's a lot more to it. Like I said, there's probably 3 dozen essays in here. Does anyone have any questions or a particular topic they want to drill down on?
Thoughts?
Oh, I see. Looks like one hand's raised. Oh, there it is. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
My question is, how much of this do you think is trying to better what our parents did?
Um, what do you mean by what our parents did?
Like trying to improve on past generations?
Yeah, I think that we are always doing that, and we have to always do that. We should always be taking things even better than our parents had it. And to a large extent we have. So it's just kind of how do we keep doing that?
And how do we reach the perfect state?
We'll never reach the perfect state. Always keep trying for the next, there's always another rung to follow.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Jumper.
Yeah, so I wanted to hear more about your thoughts around locality and where and how to build cooperation between those localities. You said like, city-states should be like not you didn't say city-state, that's my thought. You said cities should be, more powerful than states and so on, and then they collaborate. And there are, like some projects are clearly very local and others, maybe like developing like very interesting like scientific breakthroughs are such that like the entirety of humanity has to cooperate somehow. So like, yeah, I just as the problem space, I'm really interested in like if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, I do. And this is the topic of the article I'm researching now. But one of my so there's an easy way to grant more autonomy to cities. One of my favorites was done by Scotland. After in 1997, the island of Eigg, I don't know how to pronounce it. But it was only like 65 people living on this island, and this like wealthy artist bought the island and like made it his own personal life retreat. And everybody on the island was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like trying to evict residents and stuff so that he could like do aesthetic things. And anyways, really made the whole island mad. And so they organized together. And then Scotland intervened and was like, you can't like evict people on your island. People still live here. Um, that doesn't give you like governance power over the island. And then there was like a larger kind of media thing. But basically what happened was the island created a trust and bought the island from him. And so the island is now owned by, it was 65 people back then. Now there's like 110 people living on the island. And then they made the whole island essentially Georgist. So um, everybody, every farm, every household, every business on the island is renting the land from the trust. And so the trust is earning revenue from everybody who lives and does business on the island and then can use it to do things like install a fully renewable energy system, and all these things. And so after Scotland in 1999 got the ability to have its own legislature, immediately they were like, well, let's make more of this happen. And so they created this like right to buy law in the early 2000s. And it gave any community the ability to buy any land, or like what they could do is you could, as a community, say like we and the 100 people that live here want to express our interest to be able to buy this land, and if that person ever decided to sell, you got first dibs. The community got first dibs, so long as they formed a trust and the trust bought the land and the land was run on behalf of the residents who lived there. Since then, and this has only been 20 years now, there are more than 500 communities who have bought their own land. The largest one is like the city of Store. I'm gonna have to look it back up, but it's 12,000 residents. And they like own their own port and harbor, and like earn revenues from that, much like kind of Singapore does. And so so that like one thing, allowing community, yes, Stornoway, thank you. Allowing those communities, allowing those communities to buy land and all of them kind of work in this Georgist faction, earning land rents from their residents, made a huge difference. So I would love to see like this right to buy law go everywhere as much as it can. And then in cities that do not cannot buy up all their land. Most cities in the world are private property cities, meaning owned by thousands of people. Um, I think they should have the ability to benefit from that land through a Georgia style tax land rent, which would give them the fiscal autonomy that like a Singapore or like a Vienna has. Um, and that can happen. There's already 7 U.S. states that are trying to make this happen. There are a bunch of ideas in the works to try to grant cities fiscal autonomy in that way. So those are the two that I'm like most excited about right now. And then I think the remittance, your second part of your question was kind of like we also have to deal with the community. And I think we have really great ways of doing that now. Like when the United States was kind of federating the states together, we didn't really have a lot of ways that different nations could collaborate. But now we have like a million. I mean, even in the EU, you have the Schengen Agreement, which is like, oh, all of us countries agree to share borders, or you have the Paris Climate Accord. Oh, we all agree that we're going to have this kind of emissions. We have trade agreements. Europe just signed a huge free trade agreement with South America, like a lot of South American countries. So there's no reason why the coordination effort still can't happen as like a group of cities or a group of states or a group of countries. And that happens all the time. Even if you want to so much as like build a railroad that crosses 5 countries in Europe, you have this kind of cross-border communication. So I think the coordination layers are easy to happen at a wider scale. The problem is more the local problem, which I think if we bring more power to that, we can still keep the coordination at the larger level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, can you explain Georgism real quick? It's one of those
Yeah.
things I kind of know about, but then I forget after I read it.
Yeah, so basically when Henry George was living in America, there was like the American frontier was wide open and there was so much real estate and everybody just kind of bought it up like really, really fast until there was no more frontier. And then everybody just kind of sat on their land and didn't do anything about it. So you'd kind of have in San Francisco these like 10 guys living in a tiny flat, and then there'd just be this huge empty lots next door, where it's just like some wealthy capitalist sitting on their on their land because it's going to go up in value. Um, and 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 this wasn't a problem that was facing other property or other in Europe. There weren't as many private property issues like that, like speculation, because it was crown land and they were monarchies that owned land and then they had to kind of slowly sell it off. Whereas in the US, we kind of bought it all up. So Vienna is like a very interesting case study because they had all this crown land and then they kept it, and to this day are one of the largest landholding cities in the world, and only beat by Singapore, who's also a nation. So Vienna as a city owns all this land, and thus can do a lot of things with it. And if a lot of discourse is said today about China being able to do the same thing. Oh, China can build trains and all this stuff because China owns the land, and it can do whatever it wants with it. Um, and so Georgism was like, okay, well, we don't have the land. Cities don't have land. So we're hamstrung at every time by all the private property owners. Even when San Francisco had a giant earthquake and destroyed most of the city, there was no like master planning authority who could come in and be like, okay, we're going to build this. Instead, it was thousands of property owners being like, no, I need to rebuild my house fast. So Georgism was like, okay, if since we don't own the land and we want everybody wants to still have private property, then what if we just earn a like the city earns a tax from all of the land and can use that for the good of the city. And in a way, it was just like property taxes because we had property taxes already back then, and that was how cities made their money, just as they are today. Um, but just as they are today, it was a land tax and a building tax combined. So like my house here and the cost of the land are combined, and there's like a rate that I'm taxed on that. And Henry George was kind of like, okay, instead of taxing the building, we'll just tax the land. And it will tax it at 100%. So whatever my land that I live on would cost to rent annually is what I would pay in taxes annually. So it seems high. My property alone might rent for $1,000 a month or something. So that would be a high property tax. But if you're not taxed on the building, then what that means is that anybody can build, developers can build, they can build their property and not be taxed on the building. Commercial developers could build a huge skyscraper and make tons of money off of it. But if they just sit there in the land and do nothing, then it'll be way too expensive for them to hold on to. They have to do something with it. So Georgism was kind of the way around cities not owning land, but still being able to benefit from them fiscally and be able to provide for citizens locally.
Terrific.
That was my first time trying to describe that out loud. I've written it very clearly, but I hope that made sense from my mind to you. If you need clarification, let me know.
No, no, it made sense. Marcus, why don't you go?
Yeah. Um, I'm happy to talk about the network school since I'm here.
Uh,
But the network school like is a company and the service they provide is like human flourishing, I think. So the main benefits of being here is um there's lots of Americans, Chinese, Indians, like people from all around the world. And the reason we're in Malaysia is because it has like the least or the most open like visas. Like almost anyone in the world can show up here. So the idea is if I meet people online or I meet people at a conference, we could come and congregate here and at this point, if we wanted to like start a company or something, it'd probably be incorporated in Singapore, not in network state, because it's not a state yet.
yeah.
But yeah, no, it's something where like I saw that a billionaire who's super concerned about the future, like set up on an island in Malaysia. I was like, okay, this is interesting enough to at least go check out. Um, yeah, so it's still like very early days here, but yeah, I'm not like a total true believer um in the network state. Um, I think there's not a lot of consideration for like infrastructure or like healthcare or things like that. But I think like the long term view is that a lot of those things will just be like automated to be so cheap that those become less of concerns. Like that like a lot of those are like the main um considerations of states now. But if they become cheap, then a company can afford to sort of run them on their own.
Yeah, I'm very into the network state as Balaji spelled it out in his book. And
Mhm.
why I'm into the network state concept is as a theoretical utopian construct for what the future of nation states should be. I think that is so cool that he's gathered around a group of people like that who are all trying to imagine what that could look like. Not all of those ideas are going to be right. Like I don't think Prospera is the right idea, but like that doesn't mean that we're not going to stumble on right ideas. Like that to me is the fun of it. it's like it's a sandbox to play with those ideas. But I'm really excited. I'm going to be there in March, and okay, my concern going was that I'm going for a whole month, being away from my like husband and all my friends. And I don't know anybody else who's going. And so maybe I should have lined that up before, but I'm like, is there enough people there that you're like, oh, I'm not just here alone working on my own writing or whatever you're doing? Like, are you collaborating
Yeah.
with a lot of other people on a day-to-day basis and like having that kind of brainstorming?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
actually the problem here is there's like too many interesting people and too many like events
Mm.
going on all the time. So if you're coming in here to like do deep work, like you have to be very disciplined to find your
Okay,
own space and find your
good.
own time because otherwise you will just spend your time with everyone else.
Okay, good. I was like, I don't want to come there and just be like writing on my own personal projects the whole time. Like, okay, cool. As long as that is there.
Yeah.
Fun. Okay, great. I'm excited then. Thanks for sharing that.
Does anyone else have questions? I have one if not. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Um, Ella, how do you see getting older? How do you visualize that? What is the place for older people?
I'm gonna be young forever. So I actually wrote an article once. I called it the Utopia of Neverland, and I was talking about Peter Pan, obviously, but
Mm.
just the concept of I think it's really important to stay young at heart, and not ever get like stuck in our ways or disgruntled or become a critic. I think we should always be having new ideas and open. But other than that, I think society should be built in a way that supports all ages, but I don't really know how to answer that because I'm not really concerned about pe aging, I guess personally. I just,
Mm. It's
especially,
it's something that I think a lot about because there's so many old people coming through, and they're the voters. They're the only ones that vote. Young people don't vote.
oh yeah,
And and so they're hugely powerful. They're the ones with money, so they're buying all the stuff. And I'm in that group. And what does that all mean for the next 30 years or so as our children are growing up? How does how do all those old people who are stodgy and set in their ways actually influencing our life for the long-term future?
I guess I guess I'm sort of immune from that discourse because as a writer, I am both following people that are from 80 to 20, 80 years old or 20 years old, and I'm also followed by people who are a wide age range. Um, in fact, I did do meetups with my subscribers in every country that I visited, and it was rather hilarious because it would be like the CEO of a San Francisco tech company, and then like an 80-year-old anarchist, and then like a 50-year-old co-op owner, and then like a 20-year-old socialist. It was just like such a wide range of people and ages. And I think that's one of the benefits of online discourse and writing is that ideas don't really matter what age they're coming from. You
Yeah.
can just you're constant and even if you look at the history of writers, it was like Victor Hugo was writing his best stuff at 70 and Benjamin Franklin was still churning out stuff at like 80. And I think that I think age is irrelevant when it comes to ideas about how to better the future. And that's the world that I'm in, I guess.
And the intergenerational stuff is good, very
Yeah,
good. It's absolutely essential in a
yeah, yeah,
way, isn't it?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I mean, I'm 57 and I remember, I mean, first of all, it goes fast. I mean, you just have no idea how fast it goes. But there is such a thing as wisdom that comes with age. It's very hard to impart that wisdom to young people because they think you're just some old fogey. But it does exist, you know. I'm gonna put a link just um, this is a book called Boomsday by Christopher Buckley. He's William F. Buckley's son. Brilliant writer, very funny writer. But just about the political economy, it's about a woman who works in Washington and she gets to just like hating how all the money's going to the old people, you know, Social Security, and kind of starts this revolutionary movement, you know, telling the old people you all should just die and
Ay, ay, ay.
catches on. You know, he's a very funny writer though, so it's it's enjoyable. He actually, it's funny because he's written a lot of kind of political satires, and right after Trump won in 2016, I emailed him and said, you know, the world needs you to write a satire of Trump, you know, and he wrote back. He said it's impossible. He said it's not possible to satirize Trump because just every possible thing you can think of, he will do even something more absurd, you know. So
I've loved some of the other satire that has come out though. Like somebody wrote a really awesome website. I forget what it was called. It was Greenland for Sale or something like that. And somebody from Greenland wrote like so a group of artists wrote this whole website on why it should be for sale. And it was just really hysterical. It was totally satire. And I was like, this is creative. This is a good use of energy more so than just let's satire or, you know, make fun of Trump or whatever.
do you so you mentioned kind of you were working on this sort of you like to think about the far future. I mean, are there any books or movies that, you know, in particular you think really like capture that well or sort of stimulate your thinking or, you know, what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the Terra Ignota series, I think, is a most kind of accurate, I guess, depiction of how we create another future because essentially we've developed high-speed travel to the point where you can get anywhere in the world in less than 3 hours. And so it's a very kind of cross-border world. And then the United States says we're going to go to war, and everyone in America is like, we're just going to move to another country. And so, so Europe is like, hey, we'll take you all in if you want. And then the transit organization that has the high speed travel is like, well, you can become a citizen of our state too. We'll provide, you know, your transportation services to everyone in the world, and you can join our state. And the states end up being, there ends up by the time of this book, which is 400 years after that, um, there's like seven different states in the world, and it's like the Europeans, Mitsubishi, the company, has become a state. And there's a university that has become a state, and a tech company. And it's just, and then there's the Utopians, who are this group of kind of crazy scientists and futurists. And I think that's like a kind of more accurate, I think it's an accurate depiction of where we'll go long term. I think people will reshift and resettle as it just becomes easier to do so, and that will reshape all the places that we're living in.
Yeah, yeah. Does anyone else have any recommendations? I've got one if no one else does. Oh, we have a question from Siren. You're muted, Siren.
I always do
There you
that.
go.
A comment and a question. I wanted to say, Al, I feel like your optimism is really a beautiful, rebellious holding of the line in such a pessimistic world. And I know that's why you have so many fans around the world. So my question to you, you mentioned inflection points. And then, and again, just kudos to you for allowing us to imagine an optimist utopian future. So, with everything you named a lot of technological and political, what I'm interpreting as inflection points as to what would lead to a utopia. So my first question is the examples that you gave, like Basque and in Scotland, the island in Scotland, are you looking at those as mini examples of utopias? And then my second question, quite different would be, what are you imagining as other inflection points outside of technology that would lead to utopia in about 400, 1,000 years from now?
Good questions. Um, so I do think, okay, with small autonomous communities, you can create utopia, but you can also not create utopia. Um, and what like one example about with this would be like a Chinese SEZ. These like a city like Shenzhen in China has the same autonomy as Vienna. It's like it has land control, and it taxes its land and uses that revenue to for but who that revenue benefits is very different in Shenzhen, in Vienna, in Singapore, in the island of Egg. And so it's autonomy alone doesn't create a utopia. What creates a utopia is that autonomy is used for the good of those who live there, for the human flourishing of those who live there. So I do think the island of Egg has created a sort of utopia for them. I think a lot of the various Scottish communities have created little utopias for them. Um, and I think utopia is very personal. So I think in a world where we do have more access to these places and borders are more open, people will move to the utopia for them. And I think that's really cool. I spent a month in Hawaii not too long ago and did like a surf camp, and it was like the culture that I was like suddenly in this culture of surfers and local people on the island of Maui, and it was so fun. I was like, this is their culture. This is their culture to surf every day, and this is their paradise. Whereas somebody who doesn't like the ocean maybe wouldn't find that their paradise and would rather be somewhere else. Like my sister who lived in Maui at the time and didn't like it and moved away because she's a video gamer and it was too bright and sunny there. So I think so I think that utopia is very personal, but I do think more autonomous creation of communities enables us to create more utopias in a lot of different kinds. Um, there are a lot of people who move to Shenzhen because they like the life there. So so that's kind of how I think about utopia. Like autonomy enables it, but you know, it's also personal. Um, as far as inflection points, we're definitely in one now. I think from World War II was obviously like a crazy inflection point where the whole world changed after that. And I think right now that we're watching the whole world changing in all these kind of weird ways. One way in my country in the United States is we're seeing this kind of um, I think what's happening in the United States right now will cause us to either to significantly minimize the federal government. And I think that will be interesting. And we're already seeing some movement in that direction, like states trying to claim autonomy. For example, this year, New Zealand just created its own tax for its like petroleum 5 years ago, and now they can afford universal childcare in a state. A state is providing a social service. And so I think that as states are forced to take on more of the workload, we can kind of make the federal government smaller. So that will be an interesting um, development. And there are things like that kind of all over the world. I think obviously Europe is changing a lot right now. And the fact that they just did a trade deal with South America that doesn't include United States means that there's kind of this growing economic autonomy. And so I think we'll see a lot of inflection points starting now and going forward that we can that are gonna some of them are gonna suck, but we can use for good if we take advantage of it.
If anyone hasn't read Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning, um, his theory, I'm not sure if it's really true, but it's interesting to think about. He says that every 80 to 100 years, there's a major reorganization of the political order, and that right now we're in the middle of one. You know, he predicted this back in like, I don't know, 2000 maybe.
Two of my favorite utopian novels are are Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy and News from Nowhere by William Morris, because
I don't
both
know
of
that one.
Oh
them
yeah.
in 1880 were imagining the world in the year 2000. And so it's really fun to read now because you're just like, looking backward imagines this really technological future, but there's no cars, like they couldn't have seen that coming. And there's no cell phones, they couldn't have seen that coming. William Morris, they're still traveling by boat, and we can't know what's around the corner in 100 years. So I have no way of predicting how things will change, but they will be drastically different. Um, so
A good recent book, it's a slightly different angle, is What We Can Know by Ian, oh shoot, draw a blank. He wrote Atonement. Anyway, What We Can Know. It came out, I think, last year before. Um, and it starts in the future about 100 years from now, and it's about I mean, a lot has changed, mostly for the worse. But it's about this guy who's like a scholar who's trying to research. It's a literary history. He's trying to research something that happened right around this time, like 2025. Ian McEwan, that's right. And it's about what you imagine scholars do. They spend all their time looking at these old manuscripts, and in his case, he's looking at emails exchanged and GPS coordinates and things like that. And but then the second half is from the perspective of the people living it at the time, and you discover there's a lot he does not know about the past because it wasn't written down or documented in some way, and so it's a really interesting frame on that. Another futuristic one I'll mention is the Expanse series. Those are just fantastic. The writing is just like so good. It's really good writing, and it's roughly about 300 or 400 years in the future, but it's all plausible. All the technology, it's like, yeah, I could imagine that. There's no traveling faster than the speed of light or anything like that.
yeah.
But the thing when it comes to kind of the left and right, broadly speaking, politically, I think what the left gets wrong is they want to deny that there's such a thing as human nature, and they can just mold the perfect human. And I think the right gets wrong that culturally there is cultural progress. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but you can't just kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube and roll back to you know 50 years ago or whatever. It's just because people change, and culture and mores change, and
That
and
really
in a
like
way,
bothers me reading. Yeah, like that concept really bothers me reading modern economists. I used to read a lot of economy blogs, but I would get so annoyed because they would be like, "Oh, the interest rate is like this, and that's the same as 1985, and the the unemployment rate is this, and the Fred index is at this, and that's all the same as 1985." And I'm like, well, we're not looking at 1986. Like 1986 is not what comes next from here. Like we're looking at a very, very different, like even just the history of the economy is like 100 years old. So we can't, it's hard for us to it's hard for people to draw patterns from it and say, oh, well, this means this is what's going to happen next. We can't because the situation politically is way different and the situation in geopolitics is totally different. And everybody's life is very different. So it's just, yeah, all these people try to put these, barometers together and say that this is where we're headed, but you can't.
yeah, I mean, the original, Adam Smith, back then it was called political economy. And I can't remember who. There's an famous economist who was the first to really just say, I'm just going to focus on the economics, which is useful from an analytical perspective if you're trying to understand how money flows and how incentives work and all that. But you can't ignore the politics. It's impossible to ignore the politics. And um, I mean, I think that's actually kind of one of the sort of the shortcomings of kind of the crypto world is they want to take the politics out of politics. They want to imagine that everything is just encoded in a smart contract and it's impossible for humans to intervene. And I just don't think that's realistic. Maybe in 1,000 years we'll get there, but in the near term, it's always going to be politics. There's so much politics in that. There was even a while back, there was I kept the guy who left the Ethereum Foundation and went to go work for uh, he went to who was the Stripe coin. Anyway, he wrote about how even Ethereum and Vitalik, I think, is one of the most idealistic and sort of impeccable
Yeah.
people in the space. But even there, it's turned out that certain projects get preference because Vitalik likes them. You know, even if he doesn't say you should invest in this project, people see that he likes it, and therefore people go work on the projects that Vitalik likes and not other
That's
projects.
why I kind of like that's why I kind of like him actually because like because because Bitcoin is like faceless and it just is what it is forever and there's it's immovable, but he's like trying to figure out the ideal utopian way that it could go. And I
Mhm.
like that better. And a lot of his ideas I really like. And so like I would rather have a kind of ever evolving thing of trying to figure it out in real time than like the static based on an idea a long time ago.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
I get it's kind of like people get annoyed at it because they're like, oh, he's changing everything again. But you're like, oh, it's kind of interesting what he's doing.
It is. I mean, he's sort of grappling with the consequences of, you know, ideas from, 10 years ago when he was younger and more idealistic. And, in this particular case, I can't remember his name, but he left because he worked at Ethereum for like a decade in Switzerland and was making like 90 grand a year, 110 with bonus. And Stripe said, "Here, we'll give you a 500,000. Come work for us." And the reason he was making so little is because the governance there just did not allocate enough money to salaries to people.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's a political problem, that people just didn't sort of see the value of what this guy did. So, um, okay, we're 10 past the hour. Does anyone else have any questions or anything that they want to throw out for discussion or, a book? Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
I just wanted to ask Elle, if you created an institution to do thinking, what would that look like?
Um,
Because like the reason why I'm thinking about it is because sometimes it's all this thinking, but it's not really thinking, it's more like branding.
uh,
And
yeah.
I'm kind of thinking about what about actual thinking and an institution?
Well, okay. I think that I think that I think the best way to think is to write, because it forces you to think something. And that's why I created a writers collective, not a think tank, because the idea is here's the prompt. Everybody write something about it. And we'll all think it through in writing, and then I put them all together and publish it as a print pamphlet. But like the idea is to just get everybody to think about a topic, and to get everyone to think, you have to get everyone to write because people like us just talking, we can brainstorm some interesting ideas, we can throw out all these ideas, but it won't be until we like go then back and read. I mean, this current article I've read, I don't even, I'm embarrassed to say how many books I've read just to research this one article. But like now I'm coming at it with a totally different like argument than it was when I started because I learned so much more about it while I wrote it. So I think you have to force people to learn about it. And even right now, as like a fun experiment, I wrote a bill for my state, and I have been getting senators to sponsor it. And what was really funny about writing the bill was I like very over-engineered it because I'm a writer. So, and it's supposed to be just one page. So I made it just one page, but I was like, the one page bill is supposed to be like, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's the bill that will fix it. And so I did that, but my my bill is airtight. It is like stat heavy, and it's like this is the exact problem, and we know the solution will work because of this, this, and this. Like I've done all the research on it. Most bills are not like that at all. Like if you go read a bunch of the recent bills that passed, it was just like some random fluffy idea, like here's the problem, da 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 da, and here's the solution. Like nobody researched that, and like decided that that's the good solution. A lot of them are just somebody's idea. So I think at least this is the way that I work. Writing forces people to think it through. Um, and so that's why my institute is just writing.
Marcus.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I have a ton of questions. But I want to ask about so you got the grant from O'Shaughnessy Ventures
Yeah.
to like do some of your writing. I'm curious like how that like helped you open up and gave you like some freedom to work on your project and I guess from there if you have any thoughts on like UBI and like giving everyone opportunity and like you know if you have thoughts on like what that world looks like as to like what people would do with their time and like how if you have any idea on how it would be paid for.
I do. Yes, I got the O'Shaughnessy grant this year. I was a Roots of Progress Fellow the year before that. And I was a Substack Fellow before that. And so I've always been kind of applying to these things where you can kind of get money for your writing. I'm right now applying to a bunch more. And I think that is great. Um, there should be more of that. I think how we get there at scale, I have a couple options. Um, the the easiest thing for artists would be that they should own their platforms. I think it is ridiculous that the entire internet is made by writers, videographers, photographers, people that put that in, and then the platform is benefiting from the writing of everybody else. I think that's ridiculous. And the obvious answer is to make all platforms platform cooperatives. Doxy is like the best example of this. They're a stock photography platform, but the platform is owned by the photographers that provide their photography on the platform. So basically the way that works is I can buy a photo on there and that artist is paid for that photo, but the platform is also getting a fee for that, and that benefits all of the people on the platform. So I write on Substack. How cool would it be if Substack was writer owned? That would mean the 10% Substack takes is reinvested back into the writers who are all writing on the platform, regardless of how big they are. Um, I think that kind of thing. That there was one recently. What are they called? Subvert. They are trying to be a Spotify platform cooperative alternative. Very into what they're doing. So I think like that as a basic bare minimum should be the thing. I also think we can get to UBI with equity ownership because like I said, if we all owned all the equity and all the company in America, then we would all be insanely rich. And and Singapore kind of does this because they reinvest their tax earnings and their rent earnings into their stock market, but specific businesses. So they'll be like, we need a train system, so we'll buy 10% of the train company, and we want a port, so we'll own 10% of the port. And so the country owns stock in the country's like most important industries. And I think that is really cool. I think other countries should do that too, because really, really equity ownership could create a UBI for everybody, but it's just instead owned by such a small group of people. Like the common phrase is like the problem with capitalism is that there's not enough capitalists. I think that's very true. Um, I think governments could create a UBI, but I don't really know if we would want that. Also, I have mixed feelings about like a pure UBI world just because like my husband didn't work for 18 months while we were traveling, and he did not work for 18 months while we were traveling. And I was like, are you like getting bored? Don't you like want to do something? He's like, no, I could just keep playing forever. Like I would never be bored of this. Um, And this is the book you should read. The Grasshopper.
Hmm.
I don't remember the author. The Grasshopper is so good. It is about it is it's a recreation of the death of Plato. It's a philosophy book, but except for Plato or Socrates dying on his deathbed and like imparting wisdom to all of his people, it's a grasshopper dying at the end of summer, and it's based on yes, Bernard. It's based on the fable that the grasshopper played all summer and then dies in the winter, but the ant works hard all summer and then to survive through the winter. And the grasshopper is on his deathbed telling the ant that they're wrong and why the important thing in life is to play. And he imagines this whole utopian world in which all of us only have to play. And it's really good. It's really good. Um, but uh, but I think there need I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this though, because if you gave UBI to everyone, I don't think everyone would just become artists and like do a bunch of creative things. I don't think that is what would happen. Do we need that to happen in a UBI world? We would need the economy to still run, but there's a potential world in which the whole world is dark factories and we don't need people to work. And then in that case, who cares if they're creating stuff? So I think it just really depends on where the world goes from here on both whether we need the UBI or we'll use it for our best interest. So
Yeah,
mixed bag.
I think it would be, I mean, I've done real estate, um, and I own properties, and the first thing I would do is raise my rents to cover take as much of the UBI as I can. If there's new money coming in, the equilibrium is going to go up. So I think it would just take, um,
This is why the equity ownership I think could get us there more because if you think of George
right,
George Jetson, he worked 9 hours a week, but he
nine
still
hours a week. I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I
but he
didn't
just
know
got a
that.
lot of but he got a lot of money for that work. So it all worked out. I think that's like a good
Yeah,
thing.
it's a really thorny problem that I think I don't think I don't think it will work if it's just a straight up sort of transfer, tax transfer. I think there has to be some of the other innovations you talked
It has to
about.
be like from the
Yeah.
production. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the conversations here are a lot of people here are under the assumption that AI and robots will be able to do everything humans can do within 5, 10 years. So, yeah, trying to imagine that future where, like how do we create work for ourselves? Um, you know, and then the paying for everyone to live is like a whole separate conversation. But
Right.
yeah, like how do you find meaning outside of like labor?
Mhm.
How do you? I'm sure you do. Everyone does.
Yeah, I don't know, just imagining utopias, that's how I find meaning.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, we're near the end here. Does anyone have any final thoughts or questions? Elle, why don't you? I'll put a link right now to uh, your website in the chat. Um, this has been a lot of fun, though.
Yeah.
It's I can't remember who I first heard this. Actually, maybe it was oh, what's his name? The James Marriott. He says that we're reverting to an oral culture, um, and I think it's absolutely true. I mean, I listen to so many podcasts. I try to read a lot, but for every hour I read, I probably listen to 4 hours of podcasts,
Yeah.
and
My husband's the
uh,
same way. He's podcast only.
and
I
this is
tried. I can't do it.
and this is this in a sense is kind of an oral culture, is us just getting together and you telling us your ideas, but I
Oh,
hope everyone will read it and take away some good ideas of their own, whether to build something or expound on the idea. I think it's really the stuff you're doing is terrific, Elle. I'm a fan, and keep doing it.
thanks. Thank you for hosting. And it was so nice meeting you all.